This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee. Can I ask everyone firstly to switch off their phones or make sure they're set to silent to avoid interruptions? And can I now ask our clerk, Paul Goodchild, if we have any apologies for absence this morning?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from Assembly Member Duval and Assembly Member Baker's here as substitute. There's a couple of Assembly members who will be joining us shortly, but Assembly Member Prince will be joining in about half an hour as an observer as Chairman of the Transport Committee.
Excellent. Slightly okay, so item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Noted. Excellent. So we now move on to our main item this morning, which is looking at the 2024-2025 GLA group budget, specifically the Transport for London bit. So if I could welcome our guest this morning, we have Seb Dance, who is the Deputy Mayor for Transport. Morning, Seb. We have Andy Lord, who is the TfL Commissioner. Morning, Andy. We have Rachel McLean, Chief Finance Officer of TfL. Morning, Rachel. And we have Patrick Doig, Group Finance Director of TfL. Morning, Patrick. So if I can kick off with the first few questions, which are cryptically entitled context. I love the fact that we call them that. So part of it is the delay, and I thank you, Rachel, and actually also the Mayor for writing to us explaining the reason for the delay. But I just wanted to clarify, in the Mayor's letter, he talks about giving us, in inverted commas, as the Assembly or this committee, an advance copy before it was made public. And I just wondered what your understanding of that was, because our understanding was that it was given to the Assembly staff but was not allowed to be shared with Assembly members, which we found quite unsatisfactory. So that was an instruction that our staff received from the from the GLA finance team. I wondered, I don't know whether, Rachel, that was an instruction that you attached to it when it came over, or Andy, whether you could clarify. But from our point of view, that was just sort of an unsatisfactory way for us to receive that information.
So thank you and good morning everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify this. I think it's fair to say that there has been a misunderstanding at the working level. It was certainly my understanding that an informal set of paperwork had been provided to members. and therefore I was pleased to have the opportunity to meet with the chair, which we did last week, and to provide some briefing. But as part of that, I undertook that I hope we're not in that position in future years, but if we were to be, I would personally, alongside GLA colleagues, write directly to the committee just to explain the situation so that there's no opportunity for any kind of misunderstanding.
So was it your understanding that it had been shared with the members then? So somewhere in the bowels of the organisation it popped out the other end with a message to us that we weren't allowed to see it? Well, there wasn't a message that we weren't allowed to see it. We weren't allowed to know that we weren't allowed to see it because we weren't allowed to know anything about it, if you see what I mean. Our staff were given it and then we were later told that they'd had it. So, but that wasn't the instruction that came from TfL?
No.
No.
As I say, I'm still sort of working through exactly where in the process things went awry, but that wasn't my understanding.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for clarifying that, and also thank you for updating me last week. That was very useful. So our first sort of proper question, really, which to Andy, I think, which is if you could give us an update or a brief outline of the highlights of the new TfL business plan, which was published last week.
Chair, good morning, everybody. If you would just give me a couple minutes, I hope you wouldn't mind. I'd just like to pay tribute to Alan Benson, who sadly passed away yesterday. Alan was a tireless campaigner for disability rights, Chair of Transport for All, Deputy Chair of London Travel Watch, and Co-Chair of the DfT's Inclusive Transport Group. He worked closely with us at TfL and so many other organisations and on so many projects over the years. He also told us very candidly when we got things wrong and helped us to make the improvements that were much needed. We are a better organisation and London is a better city thanks to his work. I had the privilege of accompanying Alan on a number of occasions across the TfL network and to highlight challenges faced by disabled people. I and everyone across TfL will be extremely grateful for his counsel and advice. He leaves a lasting legacy, the Crossrail Accessibility Campaign. He spearheaded a Transport for All, ensured that 7 stations not originally planned to be step-free became step-free, meaning that the Elizabeth line is fully accessible to those who need it. We recently worked with him to develop new training for bus drivers and our new equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. He will be sorely missed and our thoughts are with Yvonne, his wider family and friends.
Thank you, Andy. I know the committee would certainly share those sentiments. Thank you very much for saying that.
Thank you, Chair. So our business plan, which was presented in draft form to the TfL board last week, because at that time we still did not have certainty in terms of capital funding from government. I'm clearly very pleased that we have reached agreement with Department for Transport. You will have seen we announced yesterday, and we're very grateful for £250 million worth of capital funding for our needs in the next financial year. We're currently assessing the impact of the shortfall and hope to be able to come to a conclusion on the impact of that very soon, and we will obviously let the committee and others know. We have authority from our board to get approval from the Finance Committee to approve our business plan once we've fully assessed that. But our business plan is really a further iteration of the plan that we published last year and we've made very good progress on. We are intending, subject to be able to mitigate the £250 million gap, to invest up to £2.1 million worth of capital across the TfL network. We will continue to drive our operating surplus. We are on track to be operationally financially sustainable this year, which is a tremendous achievement and the first time in TfL's history that we will have covered our costs of operation, and I'd like to pay tribute to everybody across the organisation for that. Our business plan continues to push on that, and we intend to drive our operating surplus upwards so that we can continue to invest more into our transport network. Of course, the main highlights in the plan, we will see the rollout and into service of the new DLR fleet in 2024, new walk-through trains with live customer information, air-conditioned with more capacity. that will enable us to further increase capacity on the DLR with more reliable journeys. We will continue the rollout and completion of the 4 lines modernisation programme, which is the digital re-signalling of the 2 remaining lines, the Metropolitan and the District, and the rollout and introduction of service of the new deep tube trains on the Piccadilly line, the first one of which is currently under test in Germany and will arrive in London for testing on our network in summer next year. We continue to invest in safe and active travel with new cycleways, safer junctions, completion of Old Street roundabout, which is imminent, as well as starting larger projects such as Lambeth Bridge Junction and sections of cycleway 37 and 50. And we continue with the next stage of our direct vision standards on the bus network. Continue to support new homes and growth across London with a number of schemes through our Places for London subsidiary, and we've also received funding through the Housing Infrastructure Fund for further developments on London Overground and the DLR in the east of the city. Continue to focus on new technology and innovation, looking at further rollout and expansion of the TfL Go app, making information more accessible to customers across the network, and of course complete focus on air quality and climate change, with our focus to deliver net zero across London's transport by 2030. There's some of the key highlights, and I'm sure we'll touch on many more of those throughout the session this morning.
Yeah, so just in terms of sort of quick headlines, what is new in there, and what is gone from there compared with what the previous plan was? So
our intention this year is that we will start procurement for the new tram fleet. The vast majority of our trams are coming up to 24, 25 years old. We hope to start the procurement process for that imminently. We will start preparatory works for the Bakerloo line in the hope that we secure funding in the longer term for the options of the Bakerloo line fleet, and we have a number of specific schemes around active travel and homes and air quality that we can talk about. Okay, so because I realise this is obviously all quite new, in terms of where we the deal coming through this year, this week. So the DLR rolling stock is confirmed. That's going to happen. We heard all about that at Transport Committee on Monday. It's a very exciting new development. The 4 lines is confirmed. The Piccadilly line upgrade is confirmed, and I suppose dear to my own heart, the tram rolling stock upgrade. That's all. Subject to us just doing the review of the £250 million gap that we have. Because clearly at the moment we don't have the full capital funding that we intended. But I don't know, Rachel, if you want to add anything.
No, only to say that we are still working through the options. Obviously, we constantly, quite vigilantly monitor the funding position. We will go, as Andy said, to the Finance Committee, who have the delegated authority to approve the final version. But I think we are going to work as hard as we possibly can to maximise the delivery from the draft business plan.
Okay, and then those are obviously the exciting things that people like to hear about. The Cinderella bit of CapEx, which I always am very interested in, is the sort of maintenance CapEx to keep everything that we already have running and working. So is that covered within the deal as well? So you're happy? Am I right in thinking that that's covered within, when you talk about the operational surplus, the CapEx to do that, the ongoing capital expenditure to maintain the fleet and the infrastructure, that's included within that surplus?
So we can fund 3/4 of our capital needs ourselves, and our ongoing maintenance, including track maintenance, fleet overhaul. We intend to have that covered through our existing capital needs. But again, depending on the 250, we may have to make some decisions around how we manage that. But safety is our top priority, and maintaining our existing services is the first priority before we look at potentially anything new.
Okay, but sorry, my understanding was that the forecast operational surplus for the coming year includes the necessary maintenance capital expenditure. Is that correct or not correct? Apologies if I've got that wrong.
Yes. So No, you haven't. The within our definition of financial sustainability is the renewals part, which is that kind of heavy maintenance and renewal that Andy was describing. That's then within the overall capital investment budget that we then look to answer the funding request. So it appears when we talk about the total investment budget, but specifically on the statement, it appears in that renewals line.
Okay. So following on probably back to you, Andy, in terms of risks of achieving the financial sustainability that is perhaps not quite there on the horizon, let's say, what are the risks to whether you actually get to there or not in the coming year?
So I think we are as confident as we can be for this year. We're 4 months or so away from the end of the year. We're forecasting to achieve on or about our budgeted assumed surplus. We have a significant savings task in our budget for the next year, which we've been talking about publicly now for quite some time. But we have a very good track record of delivering on our recurring savings as well as one-off savings where appropriate. So that is always a risk, but we're confident that we will achieve that. We also have some quite stretching, but we think achievable revenue and income assumptions around our income growth next year. If there's anything that materially impacts that, then clearly that is a risk. But other than that, we are confident that this is a plan that is deliverable but stretching.
Okay, and in terms of financial support from the GLA to the TfL, obviously there's the £500 million facility. I don't know whether there's something you'd prefer to talk about, Seb or Andy. There's the £500 million facility that we've spoken about before. In addition to that, is there any other support existing or potentially from the GLA core to TfL?
So I'll perhaps ask Rachel to come in. So the existing £500 million facility we have not called on. That currently expires at the end of this financial year, but perhaps Rachel, if you'd like to comment.
Thanks, Rachel.
No, thank you. So only to add that this budget does not assume a requirement to call on that either this year, and in future years we believe we have got the right combination of mitigations and leverage to enable us to manage the downside risks. So it's not an assumption that we would require that 500 million within the budget we've submitted.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So, so is that perhaps more of a Treasury decision than a sort of financial, the decision to use the £500 million facility versus some other form of financing? Is that more of a Treasury decision perhaps than a funding decision? I'm not sure how you would view it.
So that particular facility was established for the purpose of having a balanced budget during the period of TfL's recovery, so really as a kind of protection against shocks. And it's because, as Andy said, we're making that sort of steady progress towards sustainability that we haven't required to call on it. There are other financing facilities. I don't know whether committee will have any questions about the green finance facility, but just answering the question around the 500 million, it's more, it had a specific purpose when it was agreed.
Understood. Okay, we're coming on actually in a moment. I've got one more question before we come on to the green, the environmental and sustainability and the green finance. Just a question perhaps for you, Rachel. It's sort of the obligatory inflation question. Obviously, all organisations, particularly ones with lots of spending commitments, have been on the receiving end of it. Where does the inflation pressure look at the moment for TfL? Obviously, the headline figure is that it's come down. How does it look to TfL?
Yeah, so we're very proud actually of the savings programme that Andy spoke about. We have been and continue to reduce costs in real terms. And that is a really important assumption and programme for us going forward. The budget that we've submitted is based on the March 2023 OBR projection. The November 2023 OBR projections, which were produced alongside the autumn statement, actually have inflation a little bit higher and persisting for longer. So that is something, as we finalise the budget, we'll have to consider. We've had some success in mitigating the heavy inflation in some of our, particularly in our supply chain. So we don't feel that it it is difficult to manage, but we don't feel there is nothing we can do about it. But definitely it continues to be a pressure. And then, just the economy generally, that sort of macroeconomic outlook is kind of favourable in the most recent OBR in the short term in 2023, but slightly less good in the years 2024 to 27. So again, we'll take into account that outlook as we assess any risk to our passenger income going forward.
Presumably the danger there is that if potential passengers feel the financial squeeze, they may decide not to make, let's say, leisure journeys. Perhaps they still go to work, but they may not make leisure journeys and, come and see all the wonderful sights of London, and therefore not delivering as much fare income.
Yeah, I mean, that is the risk. Of course, what we are seeing in the recovery of our ridership is that leisure appears to be a strong feature in recovery. So I think that might be a reflection of the cost of living crisis perhaps affects different people in different ways. But so far, that leisure-driven recovery is holding up well.
Okay. Thank you. So that's it from me in that first section. So we now move on to a section on environment, climate, budgeting and the Green Finance Fund with Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So, Andy, what are the biggest new environment initiatives that TfL expects to fund and deliver in 24 to 25?
Good morning. So our main focus is around what more we can do around our net zero programme, in particular also climate adaptation. So we're continuing to roll out and invest more in sustainable drainage on the road network. We continue to complete, we're over halfway through LED light conversion of all our bus shelters. We continue to work around LED light conversion of our rail stations on the tube network, most recently having completed Oxford Circus, one of the biggest and most complex, and continue to work on driving towards zero-emission bus fleet. Now over 1,200 zero-emission buses in TfL's fleet. A long way to go. The official target is still 2034, but we still have strong desire to bring that forward and accelerate it to 2030. And we're continuing to work on our plans to decarbonise our operational buildings across the TfL estate, which is a pretty significant task and is still in the early stages, but needs some investment to understand exactly what is required to be done, particularly to some of our older pieces of operational infrastructure.
So the key sort of carbon reduction measures that are not funded in your 24-25 budget, can you set out what those are?
Rachel, can I ask you to cover that?
Yes, thank you. I think I said when I came for my last appearance in front of the committee that I thought the climate budget process was a really excellent innovation. It's really helped us to be clear on where to prioritise expenditure. As Andy has said, from our bus operations and our electricity procurement, this is where the vast majority of our level 1 emissions are being driven from. But to deal with the question of what we're not able to fund, we do expect all of our buildings to decarbonise those to be particularly expensive. And we are in relatively early days of learning about that. So we've done studies at 14 sites and we're beginning to progress works at a small number of them. But as you can appreciate, quite a lot of our property is quite old, and therefore we're having to kind of study each one in some detail before we're able to cost it. So the numbers that are in our unfunded climate budget submission are quite high level, but that is the most significant individual element. And then the second is, if we were able, as Andy has just said, we would accelerate the procurement and deployment of more zero-emission buses faster. And that is, as we say, we're able to fund what we need to get on a path to 2034. Ideally, we would prefer to go more quickly and have the fleet fully zero emission by 2030, but we're not able to provide all the funding for that at this moment.
But you know how much funding that would take,
Yes.
and so you're in a position to ask for it if circumstances change and there's different money available.
Absolutely, and that's very different from the building decarbonisation, where we're kind of still in an exploratory stage as we understand the portfolio and what the costs are. On zero emission buses, we're absolutely certain what the cost requirement would be if a funding opportunity were available.
And the timescale to actually deliver on that, I mean, presumably the buses got to be built.
Yes, so the way that we do this is we incorporate it in our specification for future bus services, so it's procured through the operating contracts. Yes, we will need, we would need to know quite quickly, but those contracts are being renewed all the time. So we have got a constant stream of opportunities to change the outcome.
Okay. So what is the most challenging in terms of implementation in your 23-24 climate budget plans?
I would say without doubt it's the work we've got to do around decarbonisation of our infrastructure and our estate. As we both said, a lot of our buildings are very old, and some of them may require replacement. Some of them will require significant investment to bring them up to the appropriate standards, and we're still very much in the early days of establishing exactly what it would take to do that, and even when we do know what it would take to do that, can we do it in a way that doesn't cause us to have to take those buildings out of operation and therefore have a direct impact on our ability to deliver services. So that's all still very much in the early investigation stage. So I would say at the minute, Caroline, that's the biggest challenge. The second one is around we need to secure funding, I would say, within the next couple of years for certain to have any chance of achieving a fully zero-emission bus fleet, because we need to give certainty to the bus manufacturing industry. We obviously buy, or our operators buy, the vast majority of the buses from the UK, Northern Ireland and Scotland. Other cities are on the journey to go to zero-emission buses as well. London is 50% of the UK bus fleet. So we're trying to do some work with other cities and the bus manufacturers around how can we get to a coordinated plan across the country. There are a number of towns and cities who don't have any even low-emission buses. Is there an opportunity here to start a cascade of some potentially midlife low-emission buses from London to towns and cities that have no low-emission buses to enable us to accelerate zero-emission, and then we get a benefit not only in London but also in other parts of the UK, and at the same time give the bus manufacturers a clear view of the production that they would need for the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, so that's so the sort of the buses is kind of, you can imagine it's doable, but you've got to get that funding within the next 2 years in order to do it. But for the infrastructure and estates, that's unscoped. And have you got teams who are beginning to work on shaping out how much work needs to happen there and what the sort of costs might be, so that you've actually got a sense of what you're going to have to plan for?
Yeah, so two elements. First bit on buses. Procuring the buses is one element. Actually having the infrastructure in place to be able, particularly if we go with electric or hydrogen, to enable sufficient capacity to charge the buses. We're working with the industry on how can they improve rapid charging capability as well. Electric buses need more space because they have to be on charge for longer than fueling a bus. So we've got a big challenge there, and we've also flagged to government we need help around how the planning processes can be made more agile to enable power to be put into depots and garages as well, because that's quite a cumbersome process. On the second point around decarbonisation of buildings, absolutely we have some engineers in our capital team working for Stuart Harvey who are dedicated to looking at what is required, what are the regulations, what are the potential future regulations, so we try and future-proof this as well. And this is being led under Lily Matson's role as Chief Safety, Health and Environment Officer, but with direct support from Stuart Harvey, as Chief Capital Officer. So a team of people working through and developing that plan to understand what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. So, irrespective of the position in the climate budget for the GLA process, do you still expect to set full Scope 3 targets for climate emissions by the end of this year? I think you, in the document, the Climate Emergency document Corporate Environment Plan that was published in September 2021, you said that you were going to agree and set a reduction target for Scope 3 emissions by the end of 2022. Are you still expecting to set full Scope 3 targets by the end of, and that was by the end of 2022 actually, but are you expecting to set those Scope 3 targets? And if not, do you know when you expect to be setting those targets?
I don't know the detail on that, I'm afraid. Carol, I'll have to come back to you on that, because end of 22 was before my time as Commissioner, so I'll need to familiarise myself with the specificity of that and write to you if I may.
That would be helpful. I think we just need some clarity about it, because we learnt at our meeting last week that across the GLA Scope 3 emissions work is not going to be starting as planned, and that it's all a bit delayed. But obviously, if you're not thinking about Scope 3, and if you don't have targets for Scope 3, then it sets in train behaviours around dealing with Scope 1 and 2 emissions that can offshore emissions, or
Sure.
That kind of means that we're not really thinking about the whole piece. So I think understanding when where the timescales on those targets is really important. Now, the Mayor's budget guidance says that GLA bodies should include commentary in the narrative on Scope 3 measures that are underway. Now, TfL has publicly stated it's planning a target on Scope 3 this year, apparently, but why is there nothing clearly spelled out on Scope 3, even in the narrative, in your climate budget submission?
So forgive me, I'm not an expert
on that one as well.
I'll absolutely write back to you. Yeah.
Okay. And I suppose the follow-on question from that is, so if there are issues with resource for Scope 3 and possibly for Scope 2 as well, does TfL have the resource it needs to work on climate budgeting?
So I'm definitely confident we've got the resource. I'm just not, au fait enough with the different levels of the target. So allow me to come back to you on that. I'm sure Lily and her team and others definitely are, and we'll write back to you.
Okay. Now, the Mayor committed in 2022 to a carbon pathway accelerated green, and in the climate budget you say TfL is broadly on track for the current Mayor's transport strategy, but accelerated green would have brought forward and enhanced targets in that strategy. So in the climate budget you say TfL is exploring options, and on what timescale are we going to see TfL kind of reflect those options, and the kind of things that we saw in the press release the Mayor issued in January in 2022, where we had, sorry, I've just got the press release headline. It was all about bold plans for yes, Mayor announces bold plans to secure a green, clean future for London. Maybe you're going to have to write to me about this as well, but what's the timescale to see that ambition that has been expressed by the Mayor previously? What's the timescale to actually, for that to start to be practical and for us to see it on the ground?
So I think we will make some real progress this year with our power purchase agreement, hopefully coming to fruition. We also have a number of other initiatives around private wire. I think once we get our first power purchase agreement confirmed, that will then give us a better view on what the art of the possible is in terms of further acceleration of particularly around our renewable power purchases. But I don't know, Rachel, if you want to come in on that.
No, thank you. I would just add to what Andy said about resources. Is one of the key objectives for TfL in the current year has been to expand the number of colleagues who have had carbon literacy training. That's the accredited training. Our target is to get 3,000 colleagues. I have, Andy has, all of the executive committee have had that carbon literacy training. And in addition, because we don't want our green agenda just to be the preserve of some experts, we need those experts, we need the engineers as we've described, but actually we are trying to get into all our business case evaluation, all of our procurement strategies, that consideration. So we think that kind of getting it into the DNA of the organisation will be very, very helpful in accelerating.
Yeah.
Just on the power purchase agreements, so our objective there is to have at least 50% of energy supply through PPAs, because we think that is the one of the key ways to get the proportion of renewables that we're consuming up. And of course, as members of the committee know, the PPAs have new build generating assets within those long-term contracts. So it's really an important strategy. We have had some delay in our process for this because, of course, the energy market has been incredibly volatile in recent years, but the exercise we have underway at the moment is progressing. That's taking place within my team. We hope, I mean, it's in commercial stages currently, so I can't say too much, but we hope to be bringing that to fruition in the spring of next year. That, I think, is the really, really important platform, because if we kind of master how to engage with the market, it will enable us then to think about going more quickly into other agreements.
Now, obviously, the power purchase agreement process has experienced some delay, which you were just talking about, but are there any particular risks and consequences if you can't move to renewable energy power purchase agreements in this next year?
I think clearly, because it's a critical component of our strategy, we do want to make sure that we complete this transaction. Clearly it needs to be on the right basis. And so that's why we're kind of taking our time to do the evaluation. They are long-term agreements, so, and it is, you know, novel for TfL to do that. So I'm really hopeful that we will get to a successful conclusion because it is so important to our strategy. That doesn't mean that we don't have other strands we can pursue, but this is a really central one that we'd like to successfully bring home.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So then, just in terms of the Green Finance Fund, would it have been possible to have funded the ULEZ extension without using the GLA's Green Finance Fund? Were there any other options explored? And do you expect to make any further applications to the Green Finance Fund in 24-25?
So I think I'll look to Patrick to deal with the finance fund, the Green Finance Fund.
Thanks, Rachel, and good morning. So we had limited other options to fund and finance the ULEZ expansion that we delivered this year. So the August 2022 funding settlement with the government prohibited us to use any government funding to expand ULEZ. And at this point last year, all our other sources of capital funding were already committed to our capital programme. Therefore, the use of financing to be repaid by the net income the scheme generated was the only viable option we had to implement the scheme. Now, we do have other sources of finance available. For example, we can access loans from the UK Public Works Loan Board, but the GLA Green Finance Fund provided the best value for money source of finance for us. Therefore, we made an application to that, and that was approved, and that's how we've financed the implementation cost for ULEZ. We are in reasonably advanced process of further drawdowns for next year. One of the things that we're most keen to finance is the rollout of LED lighting across our estate, but that's not yet been finalised.
Okay, so I've just got one final question, which goes back to the Scope 3 emissions. And investment in healthy streets is a very clear way that you could address Scope 3 emissions in London right now. Now, you're committing to 150 million a year for healthy streets in the new business plan, and to increase it with inflation from 25 into the 25-26 year. Does inflation pose a risk to the healthy streets investment in the current year, beyond any risks from the government coming up short on capital settlement?
So I think what I would say is, as Andy's indicated, we are going through a process now of just reassessing all of the plans in the business plan in the light of the government capital funding agreement. Healthy streets is a very important priority, but we need to get to the end of that work to be certain. But as I would stress, it's a really important priority, and we're aiming to keep both the commitment and that inflation increase through our work.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sticking on the same theme, we have a question from Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you. I want to come back to the discussion about low emission, zero emission buses. And clearly that's a way you could really step up in this area, but you're frustrated. I've heard that clearly in terms of the finance and so on. Just wondering if you could update us a bit more on the discussions you maybe had with the Secretary of State for Transport on this sort of pan-UK procurement, where TfL absolutely can be leading the way here. And also whether you could talk to me about, because you were talking earlier about sort of moving some of our cleaner buses to other parts of the UK and we would get newer ones. Is part of the problem that you have got this huge stock of Route Master buses that nowhere else in the country wants, that you actually own?
Thank you. We've not had any direct conversation on this particular matter with the Secretary of State for about a year now, I think, probably from the first introductory meeting that myself, the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor had just after he was appointed Secretary of State, where we highlighted that we think there's an opportunity here. What we need from government is support around the funding for new fleets of buses. I have very much taken the decision that we as TfL will try and take the lead along with working with other large metro areas, so Birmingham, Manchester, etc., to try and understand that we all know what our needs and plans are. We are clearly the largest fleet. We've also, I've personally been met with both the UK bus manufacturers to understand their capacity, their constraints, the opportunities as well exist. And also we've been thinking about, are there different commercial opportunities around how buses are procured going forward. The Route Masters are not a particular issue. We're actually going through refurbishing most of those at the minute, but they will need to be replaced at some point before or by the end of 2030 if we're going to hit the target, because they're not zero emission. But they will be pretty close to the end of their life by that point anyway. So one of the challenges we have is that we work on a basis of buses have a 14-year operating life cycle, and most of our contracts come up at 7 years. So it's how we deal with buses that are currently or will be at the 7-year point at 2030, and that's the opportunity we think around how we can work with other cities. And of course, we have very good relationships with bus operating companies to see how we could cascade buses to other parts of the country who currently can't afford to buy new buses and don't have low emission buses, and then we work with operators or ourselves to acquire zero emission buses. So that's early day thinking. What we're thinking of at the moment. We're clearly we'll continue to talk to DFT more widely around our desire and how we try and make this work for the entire country, as well as giving the bus industry certainty around the manufacturing needs that are required across the country.
Are you confident when you get to 2030, when you need to replace all of the route masters because they're not zero emission, they've never been the clean bus that they, I think, or claim to be, that you can cascade those around the country? Or is the reality no one else wants those and you're going to end up having to scrap them or sell them overseas?
We haven't got into that level of detail yet around the route masters specifically, because what we need to do is make sure we've got a clear plan going forward around the supply of new buses. We will get into that detail once we get some certainty around the funding and that side of it. But I would, those buses perform well. So we're refurbishing them at the moment. So there's no immediate need to replace them. But clearly, if we want to hit our 2030 target, then we will need to come up with a plan. And
how much are you spending on refurbishing them? What's in the budget for that?
I don't know off the top of my head. Probably need to.
Perhaps you could write to us with that refurbishment cost. Thank you for the total to refurbish them all. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Andy, isn't one of the problems of passing on the buses to outside of London the fact that TfL still insist on having blinds, and that has been for so many years rather questionable as to why that was, instead of electronic destination signage, which is being used elsewhere in the country?
Nobody's flagged that as a particular issue for me. Our newest buses are coming with electronic signs. There are many cities that don't have electronic displays, and nobody's flagged that as a particular issue that I'm aware of.
That was flagged to me by more than one of the operators as being a reason why it's difficult to move on the buses.
Well, I've not heard that, so I'll look into it, but I'm not aware that that's an issue, and I'm sure the technology exists to convert them if need be.
Just before we finish on this section, I don't have any other indications, but just picking up the ULEZ financing question. I know we were a bit surprised. I think it was it the October meeting, I think, where I think Enver and his team mentioned that the green financing had been used to fund ULEZ, which I was a bit surprised by, because obviously let's say the integrated impact assessment on ULEZ suggested that it was primarily an air quality and health measure rather than a carbon reduction measure. So I was a bit curious. I think we were hoping to be written to by his team, or possibly now I'm going to invite your team to sort of explain what the thinking was there, because I think I was a bit surprised. I think we were a bit surprised to see funding that was, we thought, geared towards carbon reduction spent on a scheme where the integrated impact assessment suggested it would have negligible impact on carbon reduction.
I'll ask Rachel or Patrick to come in on that.
Well, perhaps I'll start. As I understand it, the Green Finance Fund has three categories in which it's necessary to demonstrate benefits in one of those: energy efficiency, clean transportation, renewable energy. So the scheme that was approved did succeed on the clean transportation category. So I think that is the basis under the rules. I don't know, Patrick, whether there's anything to add.
That'll be on the basis of air quality changes rather than carbon emission reductions.
So no, right? there is a carbon emission reduction. I think it's in the first year estimated to be tens of thousands. I'd have to confirm the actual number. Tens of thousands of tonnes as a consequence.
Yeah, if you could, I'd appreciate it, because as I say, I think I mean, I was a bit surprised by it. I think we did ask Enver, but it may be that your team's in a better position to answer that for us. So I appreciate if you could write to us with the detail on what the sort of carbon ROI was effectively on that scheme.
Yes,
perfectly. Thank you very much. I don't see any other indications on environment, so that takes us to our next section, which is fares. And I think depending on how long we spend on fares, we may look to take a 10-minute break at the end of this section. So over to Assembly Member Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you. If I could start with you, Deputy Mayor, if you're well enough. I'm feeling for you today. I think you've got the bug that's been going round. I want to talk about TfL fares. Are you expecting the increase, which is now in March? I still struggle to get used to that because I always think of it as January. But are you expecting that to be aligned with national rail fares?
Thank you very much, Assembly Member. It's very kind, your empathy. is appreciated. Can I, just before I answer your question, just very quickly add my own words on Alan Benson, because I said online that he had changed the way that I look at the network, and he absolutely did. And Andy and I were fortunate enough to be taken around the network by him to see the many challenges that people face on a day-to-day basis. But of course, it wasn't just the network and my perception of it that changed. As Andy pointed out, he has a huge list of achievements that have made a real change to people's lives every day, and he will be sorely missed. And my thoughts are with Yvonne and his family, and we will certainly miss his advice and his presence. So in terms of the national process, of course, you're right, the Mayor sets obviously the fares for TfL, but that process can't be done entirely independently of government because of the travel card arrangements and the obvious relationship between fares on National Rail and TfL. The decision that the Mayor will make will obviously be based on a range of factors, including any announcement from government. I don't believe we've had an announcement yet. The government, I believe, is due to announce National Rail changes, we assume increases, very soon, but we don't have any detail on what that announcement will be. Obviously, that will be one consideration, but there'll be many others that the Mayor would take into account when taking his decision in due course.
Okay, just looking through various TfL documents, you've assumed a planning assumption of an annual fare increase of the retail price index. But then I look and a presentation on the TfL business plan at your board on the 13th of December suggested fares income was expected to increase by 11% in 24-25. And yet your budget submission talks about a 7% increase, which is a combination of higher fares and growing ridership. So I'm just trying to understand whereabouts are you looking to pitch your fare increases, and whether you might be looking at a different increase depending on the mode. For example, putting it up more on the Elizabeth line going to Heathrow, increasing significantly the premium fare there, and keeping others lower to whether it's retail price index or something.
Again, I think all of those different factors that you've raised will be part of the consideration that the Mayor would make. I don't recognise the figures that you've put there. The figure that is in my mind, which obviously is in the business plan and the assumptions that TfL makes, is a 4% increase, which of course, again, the Mayor would have to make a decision based on the assumption that's in that budget. Doesn't mean there'll be a 4% increase. It means that will be a factor that he would have to consider when considering what any fare change would be. But I think Andy has some more information on the 7 and 11%.
I'm quoting from a presentation to your board on the 13th of December, which assumed an increase of 11%.
So I'll ask Rachel to come in the details. So that there are two elements to this. Obviously, one is what fares increase there is, plus what growth in passenger numbers. So our planning assumption on fares is a 4% increase, and we've been consistent on that. And then there are other factors around ridership and yield, but perhaps Rachel.
Thank you. I think the missing element could be new services, because we have a full year of the Elizabeth line at its core timetable and the additional bus kilometrage. But I'm happy to take it away and confirm really specifically for you where the components of that came from. But I think that might be the additional factor.
Right. So I have that, Rachel. So I have the slide that you're referring to, Assembly Member.
Thank you.
So passenger income will grow by 11% in 24-25.
Yeah.
That is broken down into a fare rise of 4% that we've assumed, as the
Right.
Deputy Mayor has said,
Okay.
but will be confirmed. Other yield factors of 1%, which is partly related to the Freedom Pass mechanism we work with London boroughs on, and then demand growth of 6%. It's a combination of those new services Rachel was talking about, continuing economic recovery and increased office utilisation. But the headline is income increases by 11%, but the underlying fares assumption for next year is 4%. After that is the RPI assumption that you referred to earlier.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Obviously, the headline of that slide is rather misleading, actually, and then getting into that detail. Let's just go through a few other points around this then. Seb, in terms of your advice to the Mayor on this, because presumably it's a political decision and you'll be advising him. Obviously, the end of the government guaranteeing sort of TfL fares income, is that going to give you more flexibility? Might we see some more differentiation between types of services? Might you also be looking at, which we did discuss last year, dynamic fare pricing? I know you'd asked the Commissioner to look at that. Might you be looking at something different around that?
Yes, thank you. It obviously a decision for the Mayor, but it's also on the advice of TfL as well as my own. But in terms of dynamic fare pricing, of course, there are very many different variations of what that looks like, and TfL have indeed been tasked with looking at various options and what they might look like. But the question about the removal of the condition on operational funding is absolutely right. That's a condition put on the deal which expires in March. So there would be no requirement by government in a funding deal. But obviously, as I say, the relationship between TfL fares and national rail fares are linked. We should remember, of course, that fares are very much lower than they would have been had the fares freeze not been in operation before the pandemic, because, of course, fares would then have increased correspondingly, and we would have higher fares today had that not been in place.
Okay, but in terms of TfL sort of looking at a different fare pricing structure, commuters are changing how they behave. They're changing all the time. Looking at that, I think when you came before us, Andy, in January, you still said that you believe peak and off-peak pricing is the best way to incentivise travel. Are you both still in that place, or are you looking at some other sort of dynamic surge pricing or other things that might change and add to your revenue?
I can assure you that a whole range of options are being looked at, and of course it's not just looking at travel patterns here, but looking at travel patterns worldwide. And there tends to be a lot of consistency, actually, in terms of, or depending on the state of advancement of a national economy, developed countries tend to have a very similar pattern. The one thing I would say, though, is that the peak travel patterns still exist in a very pronounced way. Yes, of course, there are changes, and you think in particular days where some of the peaks are shallower, if that's the right phrase.
I know what you mean.
But some peaks have changed in nature. So, for example, the evening peak might be higher than the morning peak on some days, as opposed to pre-pandemic. But that structure, that shape of ridership, is still very much in place, and I think most of us would have experienced it when travelling on the network still. I don't know, Andy, if you want to.
Yeah.
If I may, the other thing that we closely monitor is we're obviously very well linked in with other cities in Europe and on a global scale. We share information around travel patterns. They're not all the same. The Far East is very different to Europe, for example. So we're watching closely where some cities and some transport networks have made some changes to their pricing policy and fares policy to see what impact it's having. But yeah, I think we are still of the view that some form of peak and off-peak fare is the right thing to have. Friday mornings are typically the lowest of the weekday peaks, but overall numbers on a Friday are still higher than overall passenger numbers on a weekend. So, and one of the things we need to be very careful about is that we don't incentivise people to just travel on a different day. What we ideally want to do is incentivise people to come into London more frequently and therefore use the system more often. But we, as the Deputy Mayor said, we're looking at a range of options, and we want to, at the end of the day, try and get as many people as possible using the network for whatever reason that they want to come into the city or travel around outer London.
And might we see any specific changes? I don't just mean increase, but whether it's products or whatever, or charging regimes in the 24-25 budget, or is that work still too early?
I think it's still too early at the moment. We are clearly doing a lot of work with stakeholders, both commercial organisations, stakeholder bodies around hospitality, to incentivise people to travel. I'm sure the committee members have seen a number of offers that we've done across the year to incentivise people to go and visit attractions in London. They proved very successful, so we'll continue to do those. But I think in terms of any particular fares options, that's work that we're still reviewing, and then we will make a recommendation if we believe there's something worthwhile to the Deputy Mayor and the Mayor to consider.
And are there any technological constraints to moving to some of this sort of, whether it's dynamic fare pricing or whatever?
Yes.
And the cost?
And I am, yes. And I am nowhere near means being an expert on any of this, but the two biggest constraints are, one is on our rail fares, that they are linked heavily into the national rail network. So there is a lot of complexity around that. And secondly, our own ticketing system itself is getting of an age where we've got to think about how we invest in that for the future in terms of platform and technology behind the scenes. It's not as flexible now as perhaps it was 10, 20 years ago when we created Oyster and contactless, and we're going to have to make some decisions around how we invest in that, and clearly we want to invest in a way that would give us as much capability and flexibility for the future. So there are some hard IT challenges around making changes that would be unique to TfL, for example.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, I mean, TfL has led the world on this sort of contactless ticket, so it'd be interesting to see the next iteration. In terms of the basis of your continuing steady growth assumption, what's gone into your calculations there? What are the risks around it? And are you talking to some of the other train operators, for example? Because when I've met recently with South Eastern, and I've seen their charts, Tuesday to Thursday, well over 70%, pushing 80% at peak times, 10% lower, which is lower. It's not that much lower on Mondays and Fridays, really. And they had noticed particularly a change, I think, from sort of October half term. And I hear anecdotally lots more companies wanting people coming in more. So I'm wondering how you're really analysing the trends and talking to other partners to shape the figures, and how confident you can be with the steady growth that you've put in.
So I'll hand over to Rachel Patrick in a minute. I mean, I would say that there is no doubt in my mind that TfL has some of the very, very best people in this space. You just have to look at the modelling that we did through the pandemic. It was leading, not just in this country, but actually globally in terms of predicting what travel patterns would be and demand would be. So the government started using our data for some of their own analysis. So I have a huge amount of confidence, as do Rachel and Patrick, in the team that do our forecasting. And of course we are very well connected with the likes of the Rail Delivery Group, with individual train operating companies, with National Rail, around what they are seeing. We are, TfL is bucking the trend in the UK in terms of ridership. We're up around 90%, which is higher than anywhere else in the country. And I think we should take huge confidence and credit in that, but we've got to keep pushing that upwards and focus on where there's opportunity to grow that, incentivise that. And equally, we're talking to the business community around what they are seeing. For instance, myself and Alex Williams met with the City of London just on Friday, and they had some really interesting insight into how different companies in different sectors in the city are absolutely clear on how often they want their people in the office versus different sectors might have a different view. So understanding that and then feeding that into our forecasting model is really critical, and then including that into the work around the services that we're offering and the options going forward. But I don't know if you want to add something further, Rachel.
Thanks, Andy. Not a great deal, actually, just to sort of talk about the forecasting challenge. And it's not actually my team, so I can say without embarrassment, they've really done a remarkable job throughout the COVID period in the accuracy of their predictions. To just speak about what we feed in to those models. So I've spoken already about some of the macroeconomic factors that we take into account, how the economy performs, what's happening with real household incomes and so on. So we have, our starting point is independent, external forecasts. And then what we do is we build up scenarios for the factors that are a bit more local, like commuting patterns. We modelled in the past, what might happen with absence rates during periods of heightened COVID and so on. And that has proven to be confidence providing, given how well it's done. So just to give you the numbers, so last year the recovery year on year was 31%. This year we are targeting a 6% year on year growth. We're actually tracking just slightly ahead of that. And then as Patrick was saying, the next year ridership number is for a further 6%. So it's kind of, we know that it's stretching. We know that there's some reliance, as you say, on employers encouraging people to return to the office, but only in at a moderate pace. Yeah. So we think we've got that balance right in what is clearly an uncertain sort of forecasting challenge.
Yeah, and you're connected to everyone to pick up if there are any
to
trends
give us that intelligence.
That's exactly it.
Absolutely on top of the modelling.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Actually, we had a very interesting economy committee recently looking at the central activity zone and return to work and so on. So I'm pleased that I was going to ask you whether you were speaking to those people, so I'm pleased to hear that you are. They had a lot of ideas, particularly around Fridays and leisure travel. Before I pass on, I just wanted to pick up more an interesting point, really. You mentioned, Andy, about different travel patterns or return post-pandemic patterns being the Far East in Europe. I'm just curious what that was.
So the Far East, most of the Asian cities are back at pre-pandemic levels, if not above them. There's very much a culture there of you will come into the office. So it's very much driven by that, and a lot more compliance around that. The US have less ridership and growth compared to the UK and Europe. And actually in Europe it's pretty similar, but I would say we're at the higher end of passenger numbers compared to the pandemic, compared to other major European cities.
And they seem to be like cultural rather than like specific, like, so the variance is more between large global areas rather than within cities in an area, it sounds like. Okay, thank you very much. So it's just my idle curiosity, which is quite interesting. Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you, Assembly Member Garrett. I think I was also going to allude to the Economy Committee, but it's fine. It's I would maybe plead to members of the panel here to look at what was said at that committee meeting, because there was some interesting feedback from a business perspective in terms of social use, and the session was on remote working, so they've got some insight in terms of their business patterns on people coming in and using the network and using the office as well. I'm going to actually just turn to Andy on a point that you raised about the TfL being intrinsically linked to the national rail network as well, because obviously during the pandemic, when the initial bailout deals were given to train operators and to TfL, TfL was treated differently. Do you have a sense on where the national rail operators are in terms of their bailout deals, when their deals are running out, and what they have planned or what they don't have planned post their deals?
I don't have the specifics to hand. They're all now on slightly different timeframes. The core principles, I think, are the same in terms of revenue and cost risk, but each operator is obviously on a different term in terms of their contract specifically. So I'm not familiar with the details of that. But their funding arrangements and their agreements have been very different to ours. Obviously, they are purely train operating companies. We're a wider transport network. They are part of the DfT, National Rail Organisation, so the arrangements were quite different, but they are all still on cost and revenue commitments with government directly, as I understand it.
And going to turn to Seb and just this question about the 4% sort of modelling on fare increases. Obviously, we're living through a cost of living crisis as well. What are you doing to mitigate and balance between fare increase and cost of living crisis?
Absolutely. The 4%, as I mentioned, was one of many considerations that the Mayor would have to take into account. So the 4% is a budget assumption, if you like, that is made under the business plan that TfL has. The National Rail increase, as and when that is announced by government, is another factor that the Mayor would have to take into account, as well as other factors relating to the need to balance revenue and the fare box against other sources of revenue as well. But mitigating the impact on the cost of living is, of course, another consideration that the Mayor will have to take into account, and he is acutely aware of the size of personal budget that transport represents for many people. We're very proud that we have among the lowest bus fares in Europe and certainly in the country, and the hopper fare, of course, has enabled people to take many different buses without additional cost, which has made a huge difference to many Londoners. As I said before, the fares freeze that the Mayor introduced in his first term and was unable to continue because of the pandemic has meant that fares are very much lower than they otherwise would have been had that not been in place. And going forward, of course, the Mayor will consider the impact of any potential increase on fares and what measures can be taken to mitigate those impacts on the poorest Londoners. We do have an extensive concessionary travel scheme, of course, available, and the Mayor was pleased to protect that against requests to remove it as part of the funding negotiations. It wasn't easy, of course, to protect many of those, and we have had to make some difficult decisions, particularly on the availability of free travel for over 60s before 9:30. But going forward, obviously, that will be a key consideration that the Mayor will take into account when deciding what the fare levels will be.
Okay, and just on the concessions, are you anticipating any changes or proposing any new concessions?
Again, that's going to have to be a decision that the Mayor makes when he sets the fares. But obviously, he's very conscious of the very important role that they play in reducing the impact of travel costs on Londoners. And of course, that in itself is an important part of achieving our overall target of 80% of public and active travel of all journeys in London by public and active travel by 2041, making sure that the public transport network is affordable as well as accessible and reliable is a key cornerstone.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Andy on this one, because just on the theme that I alluded to at the beginning around the pandemic, it just showed that TfL is very reliant on fares income, almost overly reliant, and we saw sort of the results of this in 2020 over the pandemic. What additional revenue income options are you looking at, or are you looking at any?
Thank you. So I'm sure the committee will remember that at the start of the pandemic we were, I think I'm right saying, about 75% reliant on passenger income as part of our fares, and then we had about 20% around other commercial, other income. We've now got that down to about 63% of our income is down to passenger revenue. So that's been a critical action for us as a result of the pandemic. We're continuing to grow our advertising and commercial revenue, and I'll ask Rachel or Patrick to come in a bit more detail on that. And that took a massive hit during the pandemic. Obviously, with ridership falling, there was less appetite for advertisers and others. But actually, with our growth now being back where it is, there's real strong demand for that. And of course, we continue to work on through our property arm, Places for London, securing income through that to diversify our needs. But Rachel, do you want to comment further?
Thank you. So only to say that I think there is no aspect of our commercial income, of our property income portfolio, even the kind of revenue that we can generate through partnerships, let's say with the rollout of 4G and 5G, we have a share in the revenue arising from that. So there is really close attention to each and every potential additional income stream. Andy's already mentioned property. You can see, looking ahead, the impact of the recovery and the ridership, and therefore the value of the sponsorship proposition, the licensing, etc., retail and so on. So it has got to be an area of constant focus for us, because we would really like to improve that ratio even further. So it is going to stay close to the top of our priorities, to just look at all of the value, making sure it's value for money for all of our stakeholders, all of our customers, of course, but making sure really that we leave no stone unturned with the commercial side of our revenue.
Okay. And there's always been sort of an ongoing case made by the Assembly around vehicle excise duty, and the fact that Londoners who pay vehicle excise duty goes obviously into a national pot, which isn't then recovered locally. Has that conversation been opened or reopened by TfL at any point in current negotiations?
It has been discussed a number of occasions, both I think at political level and official level, but there has been no change or no movement on that.
Okay, that's the end of my questioning.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to the 11% projected passenger income increase for 24-25, which is coming from the higher fares and the extra travel on the network, so not an 11% fares increase. Can you say, Andy, what has been the increase in passenger income so far in the current year above budget, and how much extra income you forecast that to have fed into the budget by the end of this year?
If you don't mind, I'll hand that over to Patrick. He'll be much more au fait with the numbers.
Thank you.
I was just trying to find the revenue number. On passenger demand, which is a key factor in total revenue, we had budgeted for a 6% increase in demand this year. We've seen about a 7% increase in demand. So that's feeding through to approximately a 1% increase in passenger revenue. However, this year we are subject to a supportive, actually, revenue guarantee mechanism with government, which means that we don't benefit from any upside or downside in passenger revenue. It's passed back to government or...
Okay.
So it doesn't actually give us a further upside this year, but it has given us more confidence in our budget projections for next year in terms of continuing that trend.
Thank you. And then my next question is, the business plan sort of bases everything around a 4% fares increase. Now, a 4% increase in bus fares would imply a rise to £1.82, which could be rounded up to £1.85, which would mean an actual bus fare increase of 5.7%. What are you doing, in light of all the cost of living questions that Assemblymember Harani was asking, what are you doing to keep the bus fare rise as low as possible, and are you able to round it down?
So ultimately the decision will be taken by the Mayor. We will make recommendations and give advice, and then the Mayor will make a decision. On fares, all our fares have to be in 5p increments, but we can absolutely round down or round up, but no decision has been taken yet, and no advice has been given specifically on that yet.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any other indication. I've just got one quick question, actually, following up on the discussion about sponsorship. I know this is something, obviously it's a sort of double-edged sword in the sense that it brings in revenue, which is good. There was some discussion about the Bond Street, Burberry Street thing and the possibility of that creating confusion for passengers. How do you weigh up those when you think about a sponsorship? And presumably you pitch the idea that you wouldn't change the name, you just add to it. But I guess it's a less attractive prospect doing that.
So we absolutely look at whether we think there is commercial opportunities. Often we get approached by a number of brands and organisations who would be keen to partner with us. You know, TfL and particularly the Tube is an iconic brand that they'd like to be associated with. We've done a huge amount on commercial activity, from sports teams to other organisations. The Burberry sponsorship of Bond Street was, I think, the longest activation we'd done. I think it lasted 7 days from memory. There were a number of operational mitigations that were put in place that weren't consistently delivered, so it did cause some confusion for some customers on the network, and we've learned from that, done a review, and they will be fed into any further equivalent scheme should we have the right commercial opportunity going forward. But we don't just agree to everything, but equally where we think there is a real good opportunity that meets our brand values and delivers financial benefit, then we obviously consider it.
So in terms of what would be done differently if there were a similar deal in future, what would be different that would help passengers avoid being...
Well, we need to make sure we have much better signage and awareness ahead of the launch, but more importantly on the day and the launch, through announcements by our train operators, through signage and announcements in stations. It was the first time we'd done one on that scale. I travelled through the station. I could see that some customers themselves were confused. We'd need to be better. And I think that can all be done and still deliver the commercial and brand proposition. We just need to be aware, particularly depending on the time of year and how many visitors there are to the city who may not be used to the station, let alone people who use the network regularly and just get a bit confused when they think, oh, hang on a minute, I thought it was in Bond Street. So we just need to manage that better at an operational level.
Or maybe you've got tourists who we
Absolutely.
welcome enthusiastically to our city who may not have English as a first language or as a strong language at all. Okay.
Yeah.
So are there still signs in the station that say, in that example, that say Bond Street? So if you arrive there, are you able to work out that you're in Bond Street?
Yes, not every roundel was changed,
okay,
but a significant number on the platforms in particular were changed. But for example, diagrams on the trains were not changed, but it's how we link that. And it was my expectation that we should have had train drivers making announcements clarifying where the train was, and that wasn't consistently done.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other indications on this section on fares. So on that basis, if we take a brief 10-minute break, we'll be back at, by my watch, 11:29, where we'll be looking at new services. Thanks, everyone. We now resume this morning's meeting of the Budget and Performance Committee, looking at Transport for London's budget for the coming year. We're moving on to a section now on new services with Assembly Member Fortune.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Rachel, the first one's for you, which is about the Superloop. Just wondering, what's the planned cost of running the Superloop 24-25, and what's the impact or the projected impact on bus income?
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to hand to Patrick, who's going to take this question.
Okay.
Thanks, Rachel. So, the early results on the overall Superloop programme have been really promising, both in terms of passenger feedback and patronage. When it comes to the financial impact, though, on income, we budget at a network level. So we don't budget specifically for Superloop income. And at a route-by-route level on bus income, it's quite tricky to work through. We have to work through the fact that there's a number of origin and destination combinations where passengers can use multiple different bus routes and substitute between them. And then we have to work through the impacts of hopper fare and travel card before we can allocate route level income. So with more time analysis, we should be able to estimate that, but we've not yet done that beyond looking at the top level patronage figures for the initial routes. On costs, we are still finalising the final proposals, including crucially, we're still in commercial negotiations on the final couple of routes. So therefore, at the moment, I'm not able to share the final cost figure at this stage, but we will absolutely write to you once those commercial negotiations have been finished to outline both our best estimate of the income and the costs at that moment in time.
Okay, so in terms of those commercial negotiations, I won't go into because I can't, but I presume that's for new buses, that's for new vehicles to cover the Superloop, right?
It's the vehicles, the drivers. This is the full suite of providing the service that we're either tendering or in some cases negotiating with a particular incumbent operator.
Okay, and is that for the announced or the already announced Superloop, or is there projected to be money in the budget to expand the Superloop?
So that what I was just talking about was for the already announced Superloop. Okay. The budget does include further provisions. So over the course of the budget period to 26-27, there will be a 4% increase in bus services in Outer London.
So is that's Outer London? I'm talking specifically about the Superloop, and I'm just stopping you, Patrick, because I'm going to come to Outer London in a minute. So it's specifically on the Superloop.
The reason I went on to that is because we have not yet worked through what those, how that Outer London kilometrage will be allocated. So it could be further phases of Superloop, or it could be something else, but we're still analysing the best use of that at the moment.
All right, you'll forgive me because I'm not an expert. So what you're looking at is trying to cover more ground and deciding whether or not to allocate that to, I guess, an existing bus route by expanding it, a new bus route possibly, which I'll come to in a second, or by putting something specifically in the Superloop. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes. So there's a clear strategic case for improved and increased bus provision in Outer London. So this budget recognises that, and now we need to work through the detailed planning to best allocate that in the ways you described.
I'll tell you why I asked, because at the TfL board meeting the other day, somebody did ask the Mayor if there was any extra budget allocated to the Superloop, and he said, you'll have to wait and see in the manifesto, which I was quite surprised the board sort of accepted, but what you're telling me is there is no specific allocation at this point for an expansion of the Superloop, but there may be some general money available depending on where you think the routes might be needed.
That's correct.
Okay, and that covers off the next bit, which is about there was any specific further allocation of funding for Outer London bus services. But would that fall into that same category?
Yes.
Okay, so there is money, but we don't know where we're going to put it yet, and that will be down to analysis.
Yes.
Okay, good. In terms of the buses that are being used on the Superloop, and I think Caroline may have touched on this a bit earlier, but where are they coming from? What existing stock is being used to cover that Superloop network?
Probably have to write to you with the specifics on that, but in a number of cases it's for some of the routes it's refurbished existing buses that were on the previous X routes. So the SL7, for example, was previously the X26. Some of those buses have been refurbished and rebranded and had new customer facilities put in place, but they're all low emission buses, and where we can, we're looking to bring electric buses in. Some of the routes can't sustain an electric bus yet because of the length, but it is our stated objective to try and get all the Superloop routes to be zero emission by 2025, if I remember rightly. And as Patrick says, the type of vehicle will also depend on what's available, which operator we're negotiating with, and what operators can provide.
Okay, so some of the buses being used were on existing bus routes and have just been rebranded. So they're the same buses?
So we've been very clear, the X26, for example, and the X140 were then rebranded. The buses were refurbished.
Just making sure I understand it.
Yeah.
So in some cases, it was an existing route that's been rebranded. In some cases, buses have been reallocated, but they are all ULEZ compliant.
Yes.
There is an ambition to get to them being zero emission. Does that mean electric for the layman by 2025, did you say?
Probably, but there is, potentially some could be hydrogen, but there's no specific plan on those yet.
Okay. So what were there was a press report last week about acquisition of buses, or the old sort of Boris buses from Stagecoach for the new route that goes from Bexley through to Bromley. There's about £6 million contract there. Were those press reports accurate?
I'll have to come back to you. I don't know the details. I mean, we any Route Master buses are TfL owned buses. I think I'm right in saying, Patrick. Yes. So this is down to the contract award with whichever operator it was. I don't have the specific stand. We can write and confirm. Okay, because I don't like to just believe everything I read in the press, Andy. So if you could write to me to confirm that I think it's on the SL3 route, which is due to come in next year. Okay, thank you. Right, I want to move now to running costs for ULEZ. So Patrick, I guess this sits with you. Can you tell us how the income and running costs for ULEZ in 24-25 compare to the pre-launch expectations? So, budget v actuals, as it were.
So we've always been clear, and I think I've said to this committee a few times, that pre-launch there was significant uncertainty about the level of revenue that the ULEZ expansion would generate, as it depends on volumes, compliance levels and contravention rates. So we currently only have some early data from the 1 month on report that we've published, which shows that compliance levels have been slightly higher than expected, which is obviously positive news in terms of the benefits the scheme delivers, but it has meant that the net income is slightly below budget. But our pre-launch expectations was that in the first full year it would generate around about 200 million in terms of net income, but that could be plus or minus 50%. So it's certainly well within that range, but slightly below our central estimate.
Okay, so that's income. What about costs? How do costs compare to budget?
Well, cost and income are quite closely correlated for ULEZ and these types of schemes. So the cost there's an element of fixed costs in terms of the infrastructure provision, but a significant amount of the costs are variable. They're either the transactional processing costs, or we also recognise the cost of bad debt for PCNs that are not paid as costs. So that they move quite closely with income levels. So as income slightly under, overall costs will be slightly under as well.
Okay, that's good. We'll get into that in a bit, because I think there's unexpected costs, and I'll just put on the record for the sake of interesting people on the internet that nobody condones the taking down of cameras or anything like that. It's a criminal act and it shouldn't happen. But there have been some costs that weren't expected as a result of the cameras, the fixed cameras specifically, being damaged. What kind of an impact has that had?
So we're not going to make public the costs of the vandalism and criminal activity, as you rightly said, because it brings further publicity to those criminal elements who are undertaking those acts, and I have to put on record I'm absolutely appalled by the behaviour towards colleagues on the network and the risk to life that some of these acts have created. And I have to say I was very, very pleased when the Metropolitan Police yesterday made 2 arrests as a result of the incident in Sidcup. So I'm afraid, unfortunately, we won't be giving specifics around the costs of these acts. We just need to give the very strong message that nobody should be threatening or harassing any of our colleagues, nor should they be damaging our infrastructure and our property. We take it very seriously and are working very closely with the Met Police to try and ensure that those people are brought to justice.
I think that's absolutely right, as I said at the very beginning. Some of the mitigation for those fixed cameras being damaged have been the camera vans. and they've had a significant impact. Up to the end of November, I think there were 3,500 ULEZ PCNs issued as a result of the vans. That came from an FOI I saw. So I would imagine you're not going to talk about the costs or the cost of security there either, although I would like a separate conversation outside of this meeting about some of the actions of some of the security guards, which seem to be unacceptable. But is there a plan to roll out more of those vehicles?
Over time, I would expect the mobile vehicles not to be being used, and we believe we had a very comprehensive network. We still have some number of vehicles being used in the Heathrow area because we're still putting the cameras in place at Heathrow. A lot of cooperation with Heathrow Airport, but obviously there's different bylaws around Heathrow. But I would anticipate there being no need for mobile cameras for ULEZ enforcement in the short term.
In the short term, okay. Thank you. Patrick, back to you. Do you expect ULEZ income to reduce in 24-25?
Marginally. I think if you look at the budget, it shows the overall figures, and the income is very similar. That is because of there's a part-year impact in 23-24, given the scheme going live in August. And although there's a full-year impact in 24-25, as we do expect compliance levels to continue to increase, and therefore the net revenue drops off pretty sharply. And in a few years' time, the net revenue will disappear almost entirely.
So what happens then when the net revenue disappears?
So our budget remains a balanced budget with that net revenue assumption in for ULEZ declining.
Okay. In terms of the operating costs for the congestion charge, the lower emission zone and ULEZ, they're all expected to decline in 24-25 compared to 23-24. What's the reasoning for that?
So during 23-24, we had the bulk of the scrappage scheme, which just supported motorists to scrap the non-compliant cars. So that created a large one-off cost in 23-24 that doesn't recur in future years.
Okay, that makes sense. And actually, it was interesting because I was looking through the paperwork, and it was talking about 77,000, I think, top of my head, cars that were not driving in the zone as a result. Has there been any analysis of those vehicles against scrappage schemes, or do we think the sort of wider displacement? That might be one for Andy.
I haven't got the detail to hand. We can certainly write to you afterwards. I don't have the detail to hand, but certainly happy to write to you.
So kind of I guess the question is, where have the cars gone?
Yeah.
You know, like when you put down a yellow line to stop parking,
I mean, we
the cars don't disappear.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Although some do disappear because of the scrappage. So it was
so we clearly know how many have been scrapped. I don't have the number to hand, but happy to write to you afterwards.
That'd be really useful. So Patrick, we touched on this before. Do you have the split of the ULEZ income, again, with daily charge versus enforcement? So how much is coming from charge and how much is coming from fines?
So we have released the 1 month on report, which shows the early data, which showed the charge income. And we are planning a series of further releases with quarterly fact sheets, and then I think 6 month and 12 month on reports that will provide more detail. I think when it comes to the budget, we're still in a stage of quite significant uncertainty around both the quantum and overall components of ULEZ income, given the complexity of volumes, compliance, contravention rates, and particularly when it comes to enforcement income, it's not just the quantum of PCNs, but it's the point in time they're paid. It's paid in the first 14 days, first 28 days, or thereafter. So the budget we've set for ULEZ income is going to have a figure in the round for next year, rather than being broken down into those different components. Although it is a mathematical product that the charge is £12.50 and the penalty charge is either £90 or £180 or even more. So there is a higher proportion that comes from enforcement income.
So there is a higher proportion, but that's because of the quantum of the fine. Okay. And so if I'm understanding it correctly, there's people that are just paying the fine, there are people that are paying the enforcement action, and then there are people that are paying the enforcement action late. And they're the three things you would want to split out from that sort of income.
Yes, yeah, and the PCN is obviously there as a deterrent to ensure the effectiveness of the scheme, but you're correct.
Okay, right. And we can expect to see some of these figures breaking out. I mean, I appreciate it's a relatively new scheme, but we can expect to see some of these figures breaking out in the next reports, which is, thank you for reminding me, and sorry Seb, because I know you're not very well. But so I'll try not to make you talk for too long. But you very kindly wrote to me after a question I asked the Mayor around these reports and when they were being issued. And in terms of transparency, and everybody wants transparent data. My concern was if we just left things to the 6 months report, it would fall into that pre-election period, which means that reports wouldn't be allowed to be published until after the mayoral election in May. And I think we would all want to avoid that because we would want to see the data that was available. I tried to be helpful and say, we could do what we did previously, which is do a 4 month report. But you've written to me to say you're not going to do that.
I think it's important that we have consistency in terms of the data that we measure progress on. I mean, we obviously know about the compliance rates. We know that the compliance rates are incredibly high, that we've seen a 10% increase in compliance in Outer London just since the launch of the expansion. We now have 96.4% of cars driven across London being compliant with ULEZ. So those figures are obviously immediate and very encouraging. But I think it's right that we have the same staged approach to air quality monitoring. Now, I don't think it's necessarily going to be during the pre-election period, but I could be wrong. But I think we might have some figures before, but I don't know at this stage. But I think it's right that we have the measure like for like, rather than comparing different indices at different times.
That makes perfect sense. So what was the thinking of changing those indices between the 2019 report and the 2021 report then? Because the 2019 report, which was for Central London, did have a 4 month report. I've got it in front of me.
I wasn't aware of that.
1, 4, 6 and 10.
I wasn't aware of that.
That was 2019. Then 2021, 2 years later, it did 1, 6 and 12 months.
I was under the impression
it completely changed between.
Sure, no, I accept what you're saying. I'll have to go back and ask, because my understanding was there was a 1 month on report and a 6 month on report, and that was always the way. So
all of the reporting so far has been different. So, I mean, could we look at? I mean, I'd be absolutely happy to accept, your guarantee that we'll have those 6 months figures before the pre-election period, presuming there's no other elections that come up in between, and who knows. But if we can have your absolute assurance that is possible, if not, could we not look at doing a 5 month report?
I will certainly ask, but I have been given very good reasons as to why we have the staging that we have. But
because it needs to stay the same.
No, but I have to look into that. I accept the argument you're making, and we'll have to get back to you on that. If indeed it has been changed, then I'll have to look at why we can't do a 4 or 5 month report.
ULEZ monitoring report, Central London 2019, 1st month report, 4 month report, 6 month report, 10 month report. 2 years later, Inner London, 1st month report, 6 month report, 1 year report, and then we've got the 1st month report for 2023.
Sure, it's a good point. I don't know whether the metrics are different in the 4 5 month report as opposed to the ones that you're reviewing.
I can imagine so, because Outer London is very different from Inner London.
But I will certainly, that's an anomaly well spotted that I will follow up on.
I shall leave you with your LEMSIP. Thank you.
Question from Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. I'm interested in these bus services, and we've now got about 30 million bus kilometres a year below the level that was seen in 2014 to 15. There are 9 boroughs in Outer London that have fewer bus services by bus kilometre today than they had a decade ago. Now, I've been looking through the papers, and I can't find a figure for an increase in bus kilometres for Outer London. I can see in the there was the passenger income graph in the TfL sort of presentation to the board with the passenger income growing by 11%, which talks about additional bus kilometres in one of the bullets about demand growth. And there is also a mention in the same report on page 12 under key 2024 changes, public transport service, and on bus service levels, it again talks about additional bus kilometre growth in Outer London. So can you give me a figure for the increase in bus kilometres for Outer London that you're proposing?
Yes. So as mentioned, it's a 4% increase. that equates to a 13 million additional kilometres. Of that, around about 5 is the impact of the Superloop and some other outer London improvements that we've already committed to. And as I said earlier, the remaining 8 we're working through the detail on.
Sorry, so 5 was the Superloop and the other bit was...
The remaining 8 is other services we've not yet planned, but we will work through detail for outer London.
And are those all in outer London?
Yes.
All in outer London, okay. And so obviously you're going to be doing more analysis. So bus kilometres are one measure of new investment. Is there any other measure that you can share with us at this stage, perhaps like an indicative cost per bus kilometre?
Yes, we can estimate an average cost per kilometre, and it is different by inner London and outer London routes. That's something we can probably provide for you. But there are a range of other metrics that we look at in terms of journey times, reliability, customer satisfaction that are also important in terms of the overall quality of product.
And are bus kilometres cheaper for Superloop buses because they're express bus routes than they are for the standard bus kilometres?
I don't know the answers to that. I think that yes, there are some reasons why it could be less, but there's also increased investment in terms of the quality of the product. So it's not necessarily going to be cheaper, but that's something we could
okay, well, if you could provide written answers on that, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Just quickly, I apologise if you have given this. In terms of the compliance rates on ULEZ vehicle compliance rates, have you given a breakdown of central, inner, and outer? I think I've only ever seen the whole zone. I just wondered if we'd seen a compliance level for each of those 3, and I suppose particularly the outer area being the new area.
So I'm pretty sure the 1 month on report gave the improvement in outer London, but we can write to the committee and confirm that. But that was, I'm pretty sure, I don't have the numbers down, but I'm pretty sure that was a significant improvement in outer London only. But we'll write and confirm.
I think I saw a figure about a change, but I'm always a bit suspicious is perhaps putting it a bit strong, but I like to see a definite hard figure of this is what the current level is, rather than a change from a number that I don't know that we were quite clear on before.
So the 1 month on report says that vehicle compliance in expanded outer London area is now 95.2%, up from 85.1% in May 2022.
Thank you. Well, in that case, my apologies for not reading that closely enough. I don't see any other indications on this section, so we move on to the next section, which is on operating costs, with Assembly Member Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Some questions, operating costs to Patrick, starting off with the savings programme. What are the key risks to achieving your target level of savings?
I'll pass these questions to Rachel, if that's okay.
Rachel.
Thank you. Good morning. I've said a little bit about our savings programme previously, which is really just to emphasise the strength of our track record with these programmes. We have been for some years now and plan to continue to reduce our like-for-like costs year on year. That doesn't mean, as you identify, that the programme isn't without risk. I think it arises from multiple sources. If I start by saying some of our investment projects that are in flight yield OPEX savings. So my favourite example is from the climate area, where LED investment reduces energy consumption by around 2/3 and therefore the cost. And it actually, in some examples, is therefore financially positive, as well as being something that strategically we would want to do. But also some of our larger schemes, like the 4 lines modernisation, will improve our maintenance operating expenditures. So there's a link with much of our capital investment programme with benefits for OPEX. I think then we've also spoken about the mitigation of inflation. So inflation is coming out at being a bit higher for longer than we anticipated when we assembled the budget. We have, again, had some success in the past on bus contract renewals in some of our maintenance contracts, in working with our suppliers to mitigate some of that inflationary pressure. And we continue to look for opportunities, but as I say, that will be commercially progressed as we do renewals or have other opportunities for negotiation. Next, we are looking to reduce the cost of some of our back office. So, for example, on our accommodation, we've developed a really clear, we call it the 3-hub strategy. What that means is that we're able to deliver benefits in subletting some of our other accommodation and so on. And then there is a very large tail of other relatively small savings initiatives, all of which need to be delivered. Our challenge actually has been in securing savings that are recurring, because that's what we're really trying to do here, is to get our long-term cost base down. So we have exceeded last year our savings target, but a proportion of that, relatively small proportion, but it was non-recurring in nature. So our challenge hasn't been, and I don't think will be, in hitting the actual pound note savings number. It will be in making sure a very high proportion of those are recurring, and therefore when it comes to things like being secure in our projected future surplus and therefore able to commit it to new investment, we've got that kind of confidence, and you only get that if it's recurring in nature.
Understood, thank you. And to sort of flip my question slightly, talking about risks, but this time talking about risks to the passenger. I'm looking particularly at the drive to reduce bus operating costs, and it says that you're looking to decrease bus journey times, which will mean fewer buses are required to deliver timetables. Clearly, is there not a risk if you're unable to decrease those times, but you're still running with fewer buses, there'll be a deterioration in the service that Londoners see? So how are you managing risks around that particular area of the savings programme?
Yes, so I would categorise that as a kind of opportunity, but only if it can be delivered. It's not something that we would seek to do unless we can bring the improvement in the journey times that goes with it. So I don't think there's a risk of a decrease in performance as you're identifying.
Okay.
In fact,
and if I could just follow up, how are you planning on obtaining those decrease in journey times?
Well, I might get Andy to come in
please do.
on this.
So there's a piece of work that Glyn Barton, our COO, is leading in particular. So there's 3 core elements. One is how we work with boroughs, because the vast majority of our bus network is actually on the borough road network. How we work with them we're doing some trials around what we call lane rental, so that we minimise the impact of roadworks. And how we better coordinate utility works, because they are the biggest single driver of delays on the bus network. So that's a key element. And we're also looking at signal timing, and there's a programme of work that Glyn and his team are leading to look at where there's the opportunity to make really minor adjustments to traffic light signalling to improve bus performance, and then there's a raft of other measures that the team are looking at as well. But the big opportunity is around removing congestion caused by utility and road traffic works and signal phasing. They will make a big difference on improving bus journey times.
My constituents in Richmond, particularly at the moment, will be pleased to hear
Indeed.
that. So, yeah. Sorry, Rachel, I interrupted you there. If you had anything else to add on that.
No, that's fine.
Fantastic. Excellent. I'll move on to my next question then, which around the what's driving the increase in operating costs for bus, roads, compliance and policy of 246 million compared to the 23-24 forecast?
Yeah, so there is a significant increase in this cost area. There's actually a number of factors going on. As we've discussed some of this already, there are service improvements being delivered. We have inflation impacting because a number of our bus contracts have written into them contractual inflation mechanisms. Now, in previous years, we've mitigated the impact of that. We've got most of them onto CPI now, but nevertheless, there remains a net pressure. Bus operators have seen some pressures in their cost base with pay for drivers to make sure that they can recruit the numbers that we need. So when we re-tender the contracts, in some cases, we're seeing some tender price pressure. And then the final element is around the introduction of an increased proportion of zero-emission buses. As we've said, we contract that through the operator contracts. There's a number of different factors. It is predominantly in that category, cost pressures coming from bus rather than the other CPOS and so on.
Okay, thank you. And that was an increase, but there is a decrease in the operating costs for the investment programme of 175 million compared to the 23-24 forecast. What's the reasons behind that?
So I think that's where in the subjective analysis we've accounted for scrappage, which has clearly been at its peak in the year, just ending next March.
Okay, thank you. I had no other questions on operating costs. I don't know if any other members, Chair.
Yes. Assembly Member Baker had a question on operating costs.
I do, yes, thank you. It's just in the budget submission around your incremental recurring operating savings, you've got a point about maintaining tight controls on recruitment and overtime. Can you tell us where the savings can be made in terms of what bits of the business are that you think the savings can be made on overtime and recruitment? Certainly the impression we've had in previous years is that the TfL staffing structure doesn't have much to give, to be perfectly honest. So can you give us a general idea of where you think those costs can be saved, which areas of the business?
Yes, although there isn't much to highlight in terms of specific areas. I mean, clearly not all areas of TfL colleagues earn overtime. Yeah. So that restricts it naturally. We have, when we have controlled recruitment, operated a system in which it applies to everyone, but there is then an exception process which equally applies to each part of the business. So clearly anything that is safety related, that is an operational frontline gap that we need to fill.
Can you be specific about what you mean by controlling recruitment? Do you mean that if there is a vacancy that comes up, you don't automatically recruit into it?
So we haven't in the past. So when we have deployed control of recruitment or control of overtime in the past, those have been levers that we've used, and that's what I'm describing. What I think we're saying in the budget is that isn't our plan, but it is something that if we need to look to add to support our savings target, it is a lever that's there. But in general, the colleague numbers are increasing, and that's important as we deliver the new services and so on.
So is there a figure attached to this? Because it's in the submission. You'll maintain tight controls on recruitment and overtime, but actually what you're saying is that you may not. So but that sounds like we're handing you a blank check. So is there a figure attached to that? What are you actually saying with this? Or is this just something excuse my bluntness, is this something you've chucked in so that if you find that halfway through you're running a bit over, then you'll start controlling recruitment, which means leaving potentially some areas of TfL short?
So I think any business will always have tight controls on recruitment and overtime. But what we do have is ongoing discussions with our trade unions around how we best deploy our staff and our resources. So, for example, in stations, we've now reached agreement with our trade unions about redeployment of station staff. because those talks are ongoing, there were restrictions on recruitment and there were higher levels of overtime. That will now reduce because we now have the staff and the agreements in place to redeploy those staff. In the same vein, in the maintenance and asset area, we're in discussions with trade unions around how we deploy our staff to ensure we get the most efficient application of those really important skills across our maintenance needs, rather than based on agreements that actually lead to higher overtime because we don't have the staff deployed where we need them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're putting to it.
Yeah, I suppose I understand that idea that you think different structures might be able to, you know, use your people in a different way that may cost less, and those will go through the appropriate processes. What I just still can't understand is that phrase will maintain, because it's not we are in discussion about we think we can save X, Y and Z through slightly different structures or anything like that. It's quite a vague, which does seem to me a bit of blank check. And in some areas of business, you'll know that overtime is actually essential, and in some areas it's because the structures aren't right and stuff like that. Yeah. Your staffing isn't right, so it just feels a little bit vague to me.
So I don't think there is not a specific number attached to recruitment and overtime.
Yeah. It's
a control mechanism that any prudent operational organisation would have in place and deploy as and when needed. But we will. It is my expectation we will have less overtime going forward because we'll have the staff deployed where we best need them as a result of the successful negotiations we've had with our trade union colleagues.
At the moment. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. So we have two sections left on capital, one on capital renewals and safety, and then finally on the capital programme. I don't believe any of the panel have any further questions for the Deputy Mayor, and I would just like to, if he wishes, he may wish to not have to sit here for the rest of the meeting. He's going to stoically stick it out. Okay. In that case, we. Fair enough. Well, I wanted to offer you the opportunity. Okay. In that case, we return to Assembly Member Rogers with capital renewals and safety.
Thanks, Chair. This is a question down as being for Patrick, but maybe Rachel, you might want to take it, I'm not sure. But papers for the October meeting of the TfL Programmes and Investments Committee indicated that TfL was not able to fund all high-priority projects that are required. And what are the risks involved in that?
Thank you. Yes, I will answer that if that's okay. The first thing to say is something that Andy said earlier. So we are a safety organisation. We always will operate our services, including the tube, to the required standards. So that doesn't mean that we have all of the funding that we would like in order to do every piece of renewals work that is potentially possible. We do carry out a prioritisation process to decide what work gets allocated within the available budget. Clearly, as I've said, safety will always get the highest weighting, but we also assess the impact on customers, on the service that we operate, and on our environmental objectives. We've actually recently engaged with the ORR, who have taken a look at how we do our asset management planning and our arrangements, and they have given us quite a positive piece of feedback that they think what we're doing is good practice and a suitable mechanism for prioritising. But as I say, I have to say again that the safety will always have the highest weighting in how we do that. Now, we're obviously just speaking more generally about renewals. It fell to quite a low level during the pandemic. So in this case, actually, funding is not the only constraint. We've had to rebuild the pipeline of work, of designs, of the supply chain, etc. So that is should additional funding become available, and we expect it will in future years, we need to keep working to maximise that work bank. And in fact, in general now, we do plan for a work bank higher than the available budget, so that if we have any schemes which slip, we can quickly step in and divert that money elsewhere. So I hope that gives you a flavour of how we do the prioritisation.
It does, thank you. And do you have any examples of projects that aren't going to be able to be funded?
So I think there aren't any specific renewals projects that aren't able to be funded, because, as I say, there is a process in which we assess the maximum that the asset management experts would kind of recommend is invested, but then we carry out a prioritisation process.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you. In your TfL Programme and Investment Committee papers from October, when you talk about London Underground renewals, some of the stuff you've just been talking about, but you talk about the reliability incident count had increased significantly since 2018. Can you explain to us what you mean by reliability incident count? To actually, give us more of a picture of what that actually means, please.
On that specific question, that will be the number of occasions that there's been some perturbation in service or some intervention required from a maintenance perspective. So the number of those occasions, I haven't got the paper in front of me. That would be my expectation in terms of what that means, Assemblyman Pigeon. But that we review all that data based on asset and based on system to look at whether we need to take any specific interventions going forward. And of course, where we have not renewed an asset that perhaps we intended to renew, we do put other maintenance and inspection regimes in place on both the rail and the roads. And just, if I may, just coming back to the last point, we do have a number of road assets where we are not and do not have the funding to renew or repair. And we have a significant number where there are some form of operating restrictions, where we are dependent on, for example, MRN funding or some form of other capital funding to repair or replace those assets. So it's not just a rail perspective, it's also a highways perspective as well.
And in this part of your budget around capital renewals and safety, is this the area that includes work on grinding rails and other work tackling tube noise?
So grinding rails is done to improve tube noise, but it is also done for maintenance purposes as well. We have a comprehensive grinding programme which is done across the network based on the condition and age of the rail assets. We still we are still taking actions to improve noise across the network, but obviously there's a limit to the amount we can spend on doing that, but we still take noise very, very seriously. Both.
What sort of money are you spending on that within your budget for the next year?
I don't have that to hand, but happy to write to the committee.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting, because I don't know if you've still only got one rail grinding machine, whether you've now got two.
We have, from memory, we have two, albeit we have had one that's been in and out of service because of technical issues.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful we get a lot of casework on that. And given you've got this backlog of works, just to keep your existing stock and assets in good condition, do you have any safety concerns at all for passengers around any of this? I know you've stressed safety, but would you, if necessary, close an asset rather than put any risks in place?
So do I have any safety concerns in terms of operation? Absolutely not. We have some of the world's best engineers, maintainers, and we will not operate anything that we believe to be unsafe. And you can see actually by the actions we've taken on the road network where we have closed some assets, we will not operate them if we believe there is a significant risk. And absolutely, if we believe a condition exists, whether it be on the rail or the road network, we will close that asset until we are able to repair or replace it. Clearly, if we had to do that on the rail network, that would be very impactful, and we would do whatever we can to bring that asset back into service as quickly and as safely as possible.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Yes, just picking up on this, the sort of capital renewals piece and maintenance. Have you thought about further reductions in speed limits in order to reduce the wear and tear on the roads and to extend the periods between maintenance being required?
So speed reduction both on road and rail is a mitigation that can be put in place if we believe there is benefit in doing so. I'm pretty sure there are a number of road assets where there is already a speed limit, temporary speed limit in place. Duration of temporary could be quite lengthy depending on when we get the money to repair. So absolutely we will and do that if we believe that's a suitable mitigation rather than having to close the asset. We also obviously put weight restrictions in place and prevent certain types of vehicles from using assets if we believe that them using the road or the flyover or whatever it may be would be more damaging.
And are you are you tracking the kind of benefits in terms of extended periods between maintenance or kind of not needing to maintain roads so quickly where you've got slower speeds in place?
So the speeds are put in place as part of a mitigation recommended by our engineers. If we have an asset that has some form of speed restriction, it will actually be being inspected more often to ensure that the deterioration has either slowed or stopped. So actually, when you see a road, for example, that has some form of operating restriction, it is now being inspected more frequently as a result of those mitigations to ensure that they are delivering the impact that they should.
So that's the case where you've got assets. I mean, I think it's the flyover that goes towards Shepherd's Bush from that one's had a speed restriction for ages. Yeah. But you've also got roads where you've put in 20-mile-an-hour speed limits to produce other benefits, which are to reduce the likelihood of collisions, reduce the likelihood of people being killed and seriously injured on the network. So might you consider rolling out 20 mph limits even further than you have, just literally to reduce your maintenance burden? Because obviously cars and lorries, buses travelling at slower speeds do cause less wear and tear on the road surface.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion. I don't think we are doing it for that purpose, but clearly if we've got evidence where we do regular inspection regimes of all our highway assets, and if we get the data, I will ask the team, if we've got data now to say where we've got an asset where the speed limit has been reduced, whether it's 30 to 20 or 50 to 40, for example, to see if we do have any assets that are under an inspection regime of concern, to see if we've had any slowing down of deterioration, to see if that has led to a benefit, I will take a look at. But at the minute, we are not intending to roll out reduced speed limits as part of a plan across London for maintenance purposes.
Sure. If you could report back to us if you do find any benefits in those assets that are under the increased inspection regime with lower speeds, that would be very appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any other indications on the capital renewals and safety section, in which case we move on to the capital programme with Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, I am going to do a follow-up, but I thought I'd just run it on, which is just about the roads maintenance and the road maintenance backlog. I think the last figures we had for roads maintenance backlog in London was in 2021, which was 1.59 billion. I think I'd be very concerned about that. Do you have any figures on what the backlog is today, and any figures on what the sort of yearly cost is for mitigation that you have to take?
I'm not sure if we have those to hand, Patrick, unless you do.
There hasn't been a further London-wide survey since that date. I think that's the State of the Nation or State of the City report we collaborate with London councils on. We have updated the TfL figures because we shared them with government as part of our recent discussions. I don't have them right on me, but that is something we can prepare. But I know we are going to work with London councils to do another one of those reports because it made the case very clearly about the London-wide need for road investment.
Yeah, I mean, bit cheeky, but I'm assuming that the number won't have gone down. There hasn't been any significant ability to invest in that road network since 2021, isn't there?
The TfL element has gone up.
Yeah.
I can't speak for the councils.
Okay, so would it be possible to get those figures to us? Yeah, on the TfL network at least. Yeah, thank you. So yes, on the capital programme, things have moved on since our briefing came out, which was obviously we did get a figure. TfL got a figure in terms of the capital funding, government funding for the capital programme yesterday, which was half what TfL was asking for, which seems unfortunate for me. I'm sure unfortunate for London. Can you let us know what was the impact in terms of planning? Is there a cost impact in terms of the delay in getting that figure out of government and getting that figure agreed? Do you have a number on what that cost? Obviously, that will have delayed ordering rolling stock, presumably. And do you have a figure on what that would have cost?
I'll ask Rachel to comment in detail. I mean, in terms of the request we made to government was to ensure we could fulfil the requirements of committed spend that's already made. So, for example, the rolling stock for the Piccadilly line and DLR already ordered and in build. We clearly have not got, but would like funding to be able to secure the options for the Bakerloo line rolling stock at some point in the future. So I don't think there's been, but Rachel will confirm this or not, any material impact in terms of our decision making. Clearly, we would have liked to have had the outcome prior to our previous TfL board, so we could have approved our business plan, and clearly we would have liked to have had the number that we'd assumed in our business plan. We haven't got that, and as I said at the start, we are assessing the impact of the fact that it is only 250, which we are grateful for, because 250 is better than anything below 250, but we're assessing the gap between our request and the 250. But Rachel.
No. So in terms of timing, to answer your direct question, so we made a submission in September of 2023, and we were hoping by the time of the autumn statement, roughly towards the end of November, to have had the information that we now have. But actually that's such a short a few weeks interval that it won't have had a direct cost. But I want to maybe draw a broader point, which is that we continue, this is a settlement for 2024-25 only, we do continue to make the case for a multi-year settlement, because for me, Assemblymember Baker, it's more the nature of opportunity cost. When organisations such as we see Network Rail now with their control period just having recently been agreed, that gives them certainty out to 2029. The other city region deals go out to roughly similar durations. That makes the kind of work bank planning, the contracting at its most efficient when you get that multi-year certainty. So I think there is definitely a question about overall the opportunity cost of not having of having a delay, but more not having a multi-year level of certainty. And then just to confirm what Andy said, in fact the options that we have are at a particular fixed price. So even though we hope and haven't got yet the funding to exercise those options, they remain good value for money.
If I may, just to elaborate a bit further on Rachel's point, you'll have seen the report that we published through an independent organisation, Hatch, around the impact that TfL investment has both in London and outside. What this delay does is creates uncertainty for the partner organisations we work with in the supply chain. You know, many of them, their financial year starts on the 1st of April, so they are having to make assumptions around whether or not contracts or work banks that we have been talking to about can be confirmed or not. We made a conscious decision that we would at least continue our investment programme across the financial year whilst we didn't have the certainty, because it would be better for everyone if we didn't get the funding we need, if we have to make any difficult decisions, to delay that to the second half of the year, so at least we could give certainty, because to Rachel's point, stopping and starting is the very worst and the most inefficient way of doing it.
Yeah, thanks. So just, that's really helpful. And just to clarify, so the 500 million requested, you said that was committed spend. Is that all contracts signed, or is that both contract signs and things you will have to do in the next year as well?
Some of them are signed, some of them are not. So, for example, the procurement for the trams has not started yet. Yeah. Some of the works around that we need to do in advance of hopefully being able to place Bakerloo line train order had not started yet. So it was a mixture. But things like the Piccadilly line trains, that contract is signed. The DLR trains, obviously, signed. So, and they're the two largest elements in there.
So, again, I'm sort of replaying back, just so absolutely clear. The 500 million requested, you still expect to spend that 500 million on the projects that you considered essential. So effectively, what are you going to have to do? Are you going to reprioritise some of these projects and push them back, or are you going to have to find the money elsewhere, or is it a mix of the both? That's still up for grabs.
That's the assessment that we're looking at the moment, and we will take what we believe we need to do as the right actions to our finance committee as approved at the board, and then we will obviously make that known. I suspect there will be a number of factors that we will consider, and we will do whatever we can to ensure that we can deliver the investment programme as part of our business plan, but there are going to be some difficult decisions that we're going to have to make, but we will let everybody know as soon as we've completed that work.
I feel like I could ask again, but I think the answer is going to be the same, isn't it? Which is you are going to, I suppose I'm trying to get a sense of, are you more likely to drop projects, or are you more likely to try and find further savings to fund them? Because that seems to be the only two options you have, really. These are really essential projects on it. But if you
generally can't answer
any more,
that yet,
that's absolutely fine. That's fine.
Rest
We will
assured,
know soon.
Rest assured, we are committed as an executive team to do what we can to minimise the impact of this shortfall, because we desperately want to deliver our business plan, but we're going to have to make some difficult decisions, and we will make that clear as soon as we can.
And would it, if the decision is made that you are going to fund all the projects that you really wanted the money for, are there any alternative places that you can get money, or is it going to have to be from savings, or is that also something that's still up for grabs?
We have a number of options we're considering. Okay. I can't be any more specific than that at the moment.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to be absolutely sure I was clear. So just before I pass on to colleagues who have some other follow-ups. So just I think you've said it. It's just clarifications all the time, isn't it? Piccadilly line rolling stock. Those contracts are signed. So certainly in the next financial year, those will be coming. That's it. But is further money needed in future financial years to deliver the full programme?
Yeah, so we've only got the capital funding. We've only got half the capital funding that we requested from government for the next financial year. We will need further capital funding, which is why we need a longer-term settlement. We are continuing to focus on growing operating surplus, so we can provide even more of our own funding, but we will still be on track to deliver the first train to London in July next year for testing, and I still anticipate us being on track for the first train entering service in 2025 on the Piccadilly line. But we need to get funding certainty for the longer term, because obviously payments are dependent on when trains are delivered and commercial terms. So we need to know our capital funding settlement with government for 25 and beyond. Because they have committed as part of the funding agreement, both the one we got yesterday and the one previously, that they recognised TfL cannot fully support its rolling stock renewal, major signalling renewal and road investment. So I very much hope, as part of our input into spending review and discussions going forward, we can get a longer-term capital settlement that will then enable us to not only confirm we have all the funding we need for all the trains currently on order, but also enable us to exercise the options that currently exist with Siemens going forward.
Okay. I apologise. I'm going to ask you to clarify that. So, Piccadilly line trains, they're on order, or all of them are ordered. That's committed. So you're going to have to find the money one way or another. But is there any way that they might be delayed if you can't find the money, since only half of what you've asked come through? What impact has it got? It's just because otherwise these questions just come up. Otherwise, basically, we go out the room and go, what did Andy Lord say? Is that what he said? Is that what he meant? And then we have to ask you again, or we have to ask the Mayor. So just, so just as much as you know, I appreciate some of this may be, so deliberately not decided, but if you can be clear.
So as I said, we are working through the consequences. I'm hoping that we'll be able to go to the Finance Committee very soon to seek approval of how we are mitigating the £250 million. But we do not have the full capital funding for all the Piccadilly line trains that are due to be delivered up until 26-27, because we don't have a full capital funding settlement beyond next financial year. Yep. So we have enough to continue the contract with Siemens. I am confident that the first train will arrive as per the published milestones, but we need government to give us that long-term capital funding from 25, 26 and beyond. Rachel, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I don't think I do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. So I think you won't be surprised to hear that I have searched the draft TfL business plan for the word toilets. And I noted there is a mention of investment in better staff facilities, break rooms, showers, and of course, toilets. Now, I am pushing for investment in new customer-facing toilets as well. So given that a high-level mention of toilets is enough to support the work for staff facilities, what's stopping you including customer-facing toilets in the business plan at this stage? I don't know if that's Andy or Seb.
So, firstly, thank you very much, Assembly Member Russell, for your engagement with us on this subject. We are, we absolutely want to improve our toilet provision across the network. We are already starting with a refurbishment programme of some of the existing facilities, both on the tube and in bus stations, and that's our first priority because some of those are not an acceptable state of repair. We are now looking at a piece of work led by Emma Strain, who's our customer director, looking at where is there the potential opportunity to increase toilet provision. Obviously, some of that work is more complex depending on where it is. It's much more challenging in the tube environment. So that's the work that's ongoing, and then we'll come back with a programme of what we think is our priority order. So we are absolutely committed to improving toilet provision. We need to make sure we've got the funding for it. In the same way, we're committed to improving colleague welfare facilities, both for directly employed staff, but also in particular for bus drivers as well.
And are you expecting, in this year that's ahead of us, to deliver not only refurbishments, but also making a start on the provision of new facilities?
I would certainly like to, but I can't guarantee that at the moment. But perhaps we can write to you after the committee when we've got a further update on the work that Emma and her team have done. The cost of installing toilets obviously is actually quite astronomical, depending on location and services and utilities that exist. So, but I would be very, very keen to start some of that work if we can find the right locations that are going to deliver the best benefit, and we can find the funding to do it.
Mm-hmm. And Seb, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. So I think in the past toilets were seen as a nice to have, and in many instances as a focus for problems, antisocial problems and so on. And I hope you'll agree that the review that the Mayor has commissioned along with the which obviously will sit alongside the business plan in terms of determining what the various levels of expenditure at each location would be, is very much focused on looking at this issue as an accessibility one, in the same vein as you would look at step-free access and other programmes to retrofit. And the high cost that Andy, of course, referred to exist in other areas, and step-free access being a good example. But I just want to make it clear that mindset is very much where we're at and how we want to focus on improving a network which is 160 years old, and oldest metro system in the world, and of course many of its component parts are newer than that, but we're still talking about infrastructure that dates back well over 100 years. So that focus on making the network accessible for all is very much where this sits in our thinking.
Thank you. And the work that's been going on the feasibility study and the briefing I had recently with Emma Strain and her team, that came through loud and clear that you're seeing the provision of toilets as an accessibility issue, and that kind of connecting that up with Step 3 is a very, very welcome change in thinking. So that's much appreciated. Sorry, Andy, were you wanting to come in?
I was just going to say, I've just checked my notes. So the feasibility study is due to complete end of February. So once that's complete, we'll be able to give you a further update, hopefully in early March, subject to us having reviewed it internally.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just to help guide everybody, I have 3 Assembly members who wish to still come in, and I make it about 7-8 minutes each. So starting with Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions, not more than 3 minutes. So I think they're very sort of questions to the point. Rachel, if I can start off with you. Now, the issue of replacement of the DLR's rolling stock has already been raised, but I'm going to still ask you this question for the sake of absolute clarity, sort of in my mind. So at the November MQT, the Mayor said that the government capital funding would allow TfL to, quote, continue investing in replacing crucial life-expired assets, including on the DLR, unquote. Given only half the funding was provided, will the project to replace the DLR's rolling stock be safe?
So I will give a similar answer to the one the Commissioner gave. We are currently in sort of right this minute working through how we mitigate the shortfall in funding compared with what we were hoping for. The DLR rolling stock is obviously well underway, so that is not dissimilar from the Piccadilly line trains in that it is an existing contract, and we will have to provide in the year ahead, but we don't have certainty beyond that. But that is part of the work we are doing. So what Andy and I are saying is that we need to complete the work around mitigation, but the DLR rolling stock is clearly underway. First vehicle is here, and we are committed to do it.
Thank you. My second question is again to you, Rachel. The Mayor also said, again at the November MQT, that the government funding was, quote, to support the next stage of feasibility work for the DLR extension to Thamesmead, unquote. Will the funding the government has provided allow you to progress the feasibility work? What can you do?
So the capital funding we received as part of the 250, absolutely not. That is separate. What we did receive as part of the autumn statement is some funds for us to further look at the rapid bus transit scheme for Thamesmead, and also we hope to be able to start consultation on the potential extension of the DLR. We submitted our strategic case to DfT and Department for Levelling Up earlier in the year. There is cross-party support for it because it will deliver 30,000 homes up to and 10,000 jobs. We think there's a very strong economic case for it, and we've got developers on side ready to go. In fact, already started. So we have received some money to explore the bus transit scheme and to hopefully allow us to start consultation. But the capital funding we received is specifically for our investment programme next year and is not linked to the DLR extension.
Okay, fine. And my last question, again to Andy. What is your understanding of the funding situation for the proposed new DLR station between Canning Town and West Silvertown, just behind us? I believe the name Thames Wharf Station has been mooted.
I have to say I don't know anything about that one, so I'll have to take that one away. As far as we got no funding for it.
Well, no,
there's
no funding.
Because I don't know anything about it.
Sorry, I asked this question yesterday, actually, of your colleagues as well, and I think we got a general sort of answer, which, and I wouldn't have to be specific. Obviously, discussions have got to be confidential, but I'm certainly aware there is at least one developer who is involved in talks to develop a housing program. A developer in terms of development, including housing, and who has indicated interest in helping fund a proposed DLR station.
I mean, we are always open to if there's third-party funding available to, expand, redevelop stations or even build new ones. But perhaps we'll come back to you and write to you afterwards. I'm not familiar with it, unless Patrick, you know anything.
Well, so you're absolutely correct. There is developer funding available. At the moment, it's not sufficient. So we are trying to explore other ways to close that funding gap. But at the moment, we do not have funding to fill that gap ourselves.
I'm not going to push you on this point, because and obviously talks are going to be confidential. I only raise this east because this is my constituency. Anything that helps London move east, I'll sort of continue to raise the case. And also, I've met this developer along with Sir Stephen Timms. So.
Okay. Thank you, Assembly Member Desai. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Hello.
Sorry, was there an indication to... Sorry, Assembly Member Pigeon. So.
Yes, thank you. I get asked this under capital programme, but in my mind, I think it might actually be revenue that is then treated as capital, the LIP funding for the boroughs. Can you talk me through what's in this budget for the boroughs, and actually if LIP funding is coming via you this year, or whether it might be coming direct from government to the boroughs? I'd heard some rumours around.
So you're correct on the accounting?
There you go. I should have a qualification in this, shouldn't I?
So the LIP funding forms part of our overall Safe and Healthy Streets funding, which, as we talked about earlier, we've maintained at 150 million for next year, and then thereafter is being uprated with inflation. For the year we're currently in, around about half of that went to the boroughs predominantly in LIP funding, and around about half of that was spent on TfL assets. So about 75 million of that went to boroughs. Our expectation is that a similar split would be for next year. We recently wrote to boroughs to ask them to define their plans for next year, to help inform that, but this supports the ongoing funding that we provided the past couple of years for the boroughs.
Okay, so there's no change in how the LIP funding comes to you and then you distribute it?
So yes, there's no change. There had been some discussions,
yes,
but there is no change to this for LIP funding.
Okay, because I'd heard all sorts of rumours that the government were going to directly fund the boroughs, which I think is what the boroughs have been requesting, rather than it going via TfL.
I am aware there were some boroughs that had made those representations, but there was no change to the funding for next year.
Okay, lovely. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Wrong button. Finally, Assembly Member Harani.
Thank you. Firstly, a question to Rachel, because obviously there was yesterday's announcement, and we've heard sort of multiple times about you needing to digest that information. So when do you think you'll be at a stage where you've digested that information and are able to come back to us on what that means in reality in terms of projects?
Thank you. I mean, it is extremely urgent that we complete the work that we have underway, because as we were saying earlier, we want to give certainty into the organisation, into the supply chain and so on. So I can't give you a specific date other than to say we are working on it right now, and we'll share it as soon as we possibly can. I don't know, Andy, whether you want to say anything further, but I think it's important that we do that work and think through all of the options, all of the mitigations that may be available to us, so that we can maximise how much of the scope and delivery of the plan that stays in place and gets delivered.
And so just talking about... Sorry, Andy.
No, I was just going to say, the teams are working at real pace because we want to get the certainty, and we need to talk to our Finance Committee and hopefully present them with something that they are able to approve. So I'm hoping that we will do this very, very quickly. Maybe we'll be able to call a Finance Committee before Christmas. That's what I'd like to do, but it may stretch into the new year, depending on how much progress we make.
Okay. No, thanks for that. But yeah, I think if you can keep us updated on sort of progress and tracking on that, that would be useful for this committee as well. And I just wanted to finally ask about the Elizabeth line, because TfL had been seeking government funding for additional Elizabeth line trains, given the decision to terminate at Euston. Was that separate to the £500 million ask, or is that an additional ask which you're waiting, which has a different negotiation process?
It's additional, and it is subject to a separate conversation. The Elizabeth line rolling stock, we've requested funding for 5 additional trains, plus potentially Alstom are in consultation with their trade unions around the future of Derby. We do believe over time there will be a need for further trains, because the Elizabeth line is proving so successful, and obviously Heathrow are also seeing good passenger growth. But it's subject to a separate conversation between DfT, the rail industry, Alstom, and we are an element of that. At the moment, there's no decision being made, but any purchase or order for Elizabeth line rolling stock would be separate to yesterday's funding agreement.
Okay, and can you update us on how negotiations are going on that?
To be honest, we're a small part in this, so we've made our request. I think DfT acknowledged and recognised that our data and analysis is accurate, but it's part of a wider rail industry rolling stock conversation with Alstom and other rolling stock manufacturers. So we've been very clear what we need, and we've also been very clear that if Alstom were to close Derby, then the likely cost of future rolling stock for Elizabeth line would be higher than the potential commercial offer that would be made today.
Thank you. And when do you think that crunch point will be, when the production line is closed and a decision has to be?
So I think Alstom have said they have no more work at some point and beyond, at some point in 2024. So that's obviously a decision for them, but we've made our case to government, and Alstom are clear of what our needs are as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think that might be a point that we need to take forward from a budget perspective, because obviously if that closes, that's additional cost.
As in, what would be the date for a go no go decision on extra rolling stock? Is that that's the point that we? I mean, I don't know what you're suggesting we do, other than we keep asking, or was there something else you're asking?
I mean, from a committee perspective, in terms of an ask to government to highlight the budget impact of leaving it late.
Yes,
basically.
Beyond, although we don't know quite what late is, but soon. Okay. And I think that'll be quite sensible. Okay, I don't see any further indications, in which case I think that brings our Q&A session this morning to an end. Thank you very much for our guests for attending and answering all of our questions and enduring the morning. So I'd like to thank everyone for asking and answering our questions. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? And can we delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting? Further few quick items. Can I ask the committee to note the ongoing actions from previous meetings of the committee? Can I ask the committee to note our work programme and upcoming meeting dates? And the next meeting of the committee will be held on the 8th of January 2024, 10 a.m. here in the chamber in City Hall. I have no urgent business today, so that concludes this morning's meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.